Hey everybody, before we get started, I just wanted to acknowledge the fact that today is Mother's Day, and I want to wish all the mothers out there that are listening a very happy Mother's Day. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and a very special Mother's Day to my mother. I hope you all have a very blessed day. Now, on to the business at hand. Cory Booker announces a bold, quote unquote, new gun confiscation plan. The shooters in Highland Ranch, Colorado perfectly illustrate why more gun laws are not the answer. And the New York Slimes leaks 10 years worth of Trump's tax returns and then acts like this is some sort of bombshell of epic proportions, even though it was common knowledge to anyone with, an internet connection. We'll talk about all that and then some. I'm Big E, and this is the Liberty Cast. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. You know what that means, so let's get right to it. So Cory Booker, he is desperate. His campaign is floundering. Depending on which poll you look at, he's only polling at about 2 to 3%. I think the highest he's ever polled since he announced, even before Joe Biden entered the race, was 6%, and that was a while ago. So he needed to do something to jumpstart this candidacy. But what could he do? Now, if you said take every anti-constitutional, left-wing, gun confiscation idea, package it up into one ridiculous proposal, you would be right. Even a cursory glance at these candidates shows you that there is virtually no daylight between any of them on almost every major issue. A couple of them seem more reasonable on certain issues, but they're all hardcore climate cultists, wealth redistributors, and gun confiscators. And Booker is no different. So he unveiled this 14-point plan designed to, quote unquote, make it harder for people who should not have a gun to get one. I don't know how many times we have to say this, but the laws on the books already do that. Just enforce them. But let me give you some highlights of this ridiculous plan. First, he wants to require a license for gun purchases. Now, many states already have this. Here in Texas, we have to apply for a license and go through some training and whatnot. But the problem with that and this plan is obvious. What other right do we as Americans enjoy where we have to petition the government for a license before we can exercise said right? Religion? Nope. Speech? Not yet. But the leftists in government and the ones running big tech are barreling towards that. So it could be coming sooner than any of us would like to admit. The right to assemble or the right to petition the government? Again, not yet. But if we're not careful, who knows? And if we let them get away with abridging the Second Amendment, it will only be a matter of time before it spreads to all the other rights that we enjoy. The Constitution is my gun permit. In his plan, he also wants to eliminate the PLCAA. That's the Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act, which would allow victims of gun violence to sue gun manufacturers. Why this is ridiculous should be obvious to everyone. But let me just say this. This isn't like suing a ladder manufacturer if one of the rungs breaks and you suffer a severe injury, or suing a car manufacturer for a design flaw that causes severe injury or death, which are legitimate reasons to pursue legal recourse. In fact, I know someone who had to sue a car manufacturer because there was an accident that involved the death of his wife. Very completely legit reasons to sue. But gun manufacturers sell tools. How someone chooses to use that tool is not the manufacturer's responsibility, and as such should suffer no legal consequences when someone uses that tool illegally. In 2017, according to the FBI's Uniform Crime Report, more people were killed with hammers, clubs, bats, etc., 467, than with rifles, which there were 403 murders committed with rifles. How many murders do you think were committed with knives? 1,591. Fists, feet, etc., personal weapons, 692. Shotguns, on the other hand, 264. Is anyone talking about suing Cobalt or Stanley when one of their hammers is used to bludgeon someone? Is anyone talking about suing Louisville Slugger if somebody uses a baseball bat to kill someone? Is anyone talking about suing Ginsu if someone gets stabbed with a kitchen knife? Or Spyderco or Benchmade or any other knife manufacturer for murders committed with those products? No. So why do you want to sue gun manufacturers for their products? It makes no sense. It really makes no sense, but I'm going to tell you exactly why they want this to happen. They want gun manufacturers out of business altogether. And if Booker were to get elected somehow by some stretch of the imagination, I know it's not going to happen, but he's not the only one that thinks along these lines. But if something like this were to get passed, gun manufacturers would get sued right out of business. Also included in this plan, he wants to limit how many guns you can buy in a month. He wants to limit it to one, claiming that traffickers make bulk purchases to resell in other states. Come on. Traffickers don't go to Academy or your local gun retailer to buy in bulk. That's just stupid. I would really, really love to know where he gets his data from. What am I thinking? Data? Come on. Now, I know that I have purchased multiple guns in a single trip to the gun shop. I bought multiple guns in a 30-day period. I'm not a trafficker. And the average person, the average enthusiast may get a bonus and want to buy 2 or 3 guns at a time that they may have had their eye on. I know if I ever get a big enough bonus, that's one of the things I want to do. So this is just ridiculous. The last point in his proposal that I want to touch on, and I know there are 14, some of them are stupid and some of them are stuff we've all heard before. And this one is too. But I do want to mention this one, and this is, actually there's 2, but they both have to do with loopholes. He wants to close the quote-unquote boyfriend and Charleston loopholes. Now we'll tackle the boyfriend one first. He says that non-felony abuse at the hands of dating partners or former dating partners doesn't render someone a prohibited possessor. There are a number of issues with this so-called loophole. First, I believe that no such loophole exists based on my reading of 18 U.S.C. Section 922, which defines the misdemeanor crime of domestic violence as any state or federal misdemeanor that, quote, has an element, the use or attempted use of physical force, or the threatened use of a deadly weapon committed by a current or former spouse, parent, or guardian of the victim, by a person with whom the victim shares a child in common, by a person who is cohabitating with or has cohabitated with the victim as a spouse, parent, or guardian, or by a person similarly situated to a spouse, parent, or guardian of the victim. Now, while not explicitly stated, I would think that a boyfriend is similarly situated to a spouse. No? I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but if there are any lawyers listening, please feel free to let me know if I'm wrong, because obviously domestic abusers of any stripe should not be allowed to purchase firearms. I think we all can agree on that. But that brings us to the Charleston loophole, another loophole that doesn't actually exist, just like the gun show loophole, which we've gone over ad nauseum. But the anti-constitutionalists claim that there's a loophole in the current law that enables a licensed gun dealer, an FFL, to sell someone a firearm before the required background checks have been completed. But the law actually states that if a background check is not completed within 3 business days, the shop is free to sell the person that firearm if they so choose. Now, the fact that the Charleston shooter was sold a firearm with the charges he had against him still pending shows that the system needs to be fixed, not the law. And in fact, with today's technology, I contend that they could reduce that waiting period to 24 hours. Now, as much as I like to bang on the FBI when it comes to enforcing current gun laws, I don't think this one can be blamed on them. They got the runaround from the Columbia PD, West Columbia PD, and the Lexington County Sheriff's Office. Now, the Lexington County Sheriff's Office told the investigator that the Columbia PD would have the police report, but the FBI didn't have contact information for him. So they contacted the West Columbia PD, who simply responded to their request, "This is not a WCPD arrest." Didn't tell them to try Columbia or anything, didn't give them any contact information, didn't try to direct them in any other way, just said it's not us. Now, of course, the FBI could have kept digging, but they averaged 30,000 checks like this a month. The shooting in Charleston was tragic, yes. The shooter is an evil person, but this was not the result of a loophole. Now, there are some pretty obvious ways to fix this, but extending the waiting period or denying purchases without a formal disposition is not one of them. I wonder how many mass shootings, or really any shootings for that matter, would have been prevented with any of those proposals that Cory Booker would implement should he be elected president. I'm going to go way out on the limb and say none. But that brings us to the shooting at the STEM school in Highland Ranch, Colorado. Now, have you noticed that this shooting has not dominated the news cycle the way other shootings have? I wonder why. But let's look at what we know so far. Both of the suspects were too young to buy firearms and, according to reports, stole them, broke into one of the parents' locked cabinets and stole them. So they were too young to buy them legally, obtained them illegally, and therefore were in possession of them illegally. Now, these kids, I know one of them is 18 and legally an adult, but as far as I'm concerned, centennials and even some millennials are kids. But these two kids were clearly troubled. The 18-year-old male suspect was reportedly a bully who liked to start fights and joke about shooting up the school. Now, there's a picture of him in one of the stories, and I'm sorry, given this kid's history dating back to the 8th grade, according to one report, how someone did not whoop his ass, I'll never know. Because I guarantee that skinny twerp would not have gotten away with any of his antics in my high school. And I'm not saying that to suggest that someone should have thrown him a beating, but these things do happen in high school. And I'm also not suggesting that had somebody thrown him a beating, this shooting would not have happened, because as I said, evil people find a way to do evil things. But the second suspect, another troubled young person, is a girl who is identifying, quote unquote, as a boy. And this kid has daddy issues. Her father was an illegal alien who had been deported multiple times, once served a year in jail after being convicted of domestic violence against her mother, was arrested multiple times in Colorado between 2008 and 2017. There was a tweet where she posted about missing her father, which falls right in line with most school shooters who don't have a father in their lives. So as I said, these were troubled kids who illegally obtained, possessed, and used firearms to terrorize their school. Firearms laws were not going to prevent this tragedy. Maybe if someone had been more proactive with this bully, that might have, but even still, and I keep coming back to this, evil people. We repeat this all the time. The problem is not with the guns. The problem is with the people holding the guns. So any attempt to use this shooting as an example of how more gun laws could somehow have prevented it is a non sequitur. Evil people will always find a way to commit evil acts, and taking away my right to defend myself and my family against such an evil person is not going to stop them in any way. A sports talk radio host I used to listen to back in the day said something that really stuck with me. He said, "Say that out loud, and if it makes as much sense to you out loud as it did in your head, then you're good." So I have a really hard time understanding how these supposedly intelligent people can propose taking guns away from law-abiding citizens to prevent criminals from committing heinous acts with firearms. Murder is illegal. People still kill people. Rape is illegal. Men still commit rapes. Burglary is illegal. Robbery is illegal. Selling drugs is illegal. Yet we have jails and prisons packed to the gills with criminals who have committed any number of these and other crimes. Yet I never hear any of these leftists talking about writing more laws or taking executive action to curb any of those offenses. Why is that? Well, that was rhetorical. We know why. It's because the guns in the hands of law-abiding citizens afford us a level of freedom, independence, and self-determination that the power-hungry left just cannot abide. It's about power and control for them. And as long as you and I keep and bear arms, they will not be in total control. All right, let's move on because there's a few other things I want to get to today. Somehow, the New York Times got a hold of President Trump's tax returns from 1985 to 1994. Supposedly, someone with legal access provided them. First of all, this information is supposed to be private, and there is no law requiring that a presidential candidate disclose their tax returns, and there's no law requiring sitting presidents to disclose their tax returns from the time prior to their being elected into office. However, there is a law prohibiting the release of this information, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Right now, let's take a quick break. Now, as I was saying before the break, there is a law prohibiting the release of this information. It is U.S. Code Title 26, Section 7213, which makes it a felony for any federal employee to disclose tax returns or return information. Subsection A3 of the law makes it a felony for any person who receives an illegally disclosed tax return or return information to publish that information. Seems pretty cut and dry to me. But the left, they're absolutely giddy in reporting the information contained in those returns as news. Don Lemon, as Tucker Carlson likes to call him, had this to say.
During those years, Trump lost a staggering $1.17 billion. $1.17 billion on his casinos, on his hotels, retail spaces, in apartment buildings. Casinos. Casinos losing money? You know what they say about gambling, casino gambling, right? The house always wins. Well, not always. Not if it's a Trump casino. Come on. Who loses money at a casino except for the person gambling, not the owner?
Okay there, lemonade. If you've seen An Officer and a Gentleman, you'll get that reference. But he's not the only one. All of the journalists over there at CNN got in on the action. Listen to, what's this woman's name? Erin Burnett.
He lost more than double the next biggest loser in this country. So he's literally the biggest loser. His losses were more than double the next biggest loser in the country. Does this to you explain why he doesn't want anyone to have this information? That he was such a loser? He calls people losers, and he has such disdain, and yet he was literally the biggest loser in the country.
And then good old Anderson Cooper got in the mix as well.
So, I mean, the irony is
stunning.
He was actually the biggest loser, to use a term he would use if he was labeling somebody else.
If he was writing the headline at the New York Times, that would be it.
These so-called journalists over at CNN have been on such an anti-Trump crusade since he announced his candidacy that this is just tedious. But here again, they're reporting this as though it were news. But it was news back during that time period. This was over 30 years ago. And not only was it already news, not only is it not news now, but he's been completely transparent about it.
About 13 years ago, I was seriously in trouble. I was billions of dollars in debt. But I fought back and I won. Big league. I used my brain. I used my negotiating skills, and I worked it all out. Now my company's bigger than it ever was. It's stronger than it ever was. And I'm having more fun than I ever had.
That was the opening to the series premiere of The Apprentice back in January of 2004. So not only was it reported, not only did he speak about it candidly, but he also wrote a book called The Art of the Comeback, where he outlined exactly what happened and how he was able to turn it around. Now, 30 plus years later, Don Lemonade and crew are cackling like this is some sort of revelation. Come on. Now, this reporting has also raised questions again about his actual net worth. People have always speculated that he may have been overstating his wealth and whatnot. Maybe he has, maybe he hasn't. I don't know. I don't care. So what if he claimed to be worth 10 billion and he was actually only worth 5? It's still 5 billion more than my net worth. And I would hazard a guess 5 billion more than any of my listeners at this point. Of course, if any of my listeners are worth anywhere near that, please feel free to reach out to me so that we can talk about you investing in this show and my wife's business. No, really, I'm serious. Feel free. But I mean, you seriously have to wonder, with all the great economic news, and I know I've talked about the spending and the debt and all that, but the economy is still humming along right now. And with all the great news about this economy, you have to wonder, what is it that they want? What is it that the left wants? And given the praise that they heaped on Obama when the economy was in the tank, I think that kind of pretty much says it, doesn't it? Okay, let's press on because there's still a few other things I want to touch on today before we let you go. Brian Sims is a jackass. There's really no other way to put it. This guy, he's a state lawmaker from Pennsylvania. He's been in the news lately for harassing an elderly woman and another woman with 3 teenage girls, and specifically those teenage girls. In both cases, he threatened to dox them. And in the case of the girls, age 15, and 13, by the way, he offered $100 to anyone who could provide their names and addresses so that he could protest in front of their homes. Guess what? Not only is that against Twitter and Facebook policy, but it's also illegal. This guy is a piece of work. Now, at least Twitter took down those videos. They're still up on Facebook, by the way. But check this out. This is a portion of one of the videos where he's harassing the young teenage girls.
Ben Sims here, and I am outside the Planned Parenthood at southeastern Pennsylvania. Oh, no, they're leaving now. What we've got here is a bunch of protesters. bunch of pseudo-Christian protesters who've been out here shaming young girls for being here. And so here's the deal. I've got $100 to anybody who will identify any of these three.
So we're
that I'm going to
actually
donate
just
to Planned
praying for the
Parenthood.
babies.
I'm going to donate to Planned Parenthood. So
we
look,
believe that
a
women
bunch of
deserve
white
more.
people standing out in front of a Planned Parenthood,
deserve more.
shaming
I'm
people.
really
There's nothing
sorry.
Christian about what you're doing.
I'm pretty
Nothing
far from
Christian
white.
at all about what you're doing. Hi, nothing Christian or loving or godly about what you're doing. So I've got $100 to anybody who will identify who this. $100. See if you got some friends out here. $100. It'd be easier if you just give me your name and your address. Come on.
Rich Boheinski,
Rich, where you from?
Lansdowne.
Rich, what makes you think that it's your job to tell women what's right for their bodies? And the truth is, I'm not really asking because I don't care. Shame on you. Guys, Planned Parenthood out here faces attacks daily from people like this, from pseudo-Christians saying that they are here to somehow protect their own version of Christianity. So do me a favor. If you've watched this, please consider giving $100 to Planned Parenthood. I'm going to do the same.
Some of that was a little difficult to make out, but at one point, one of the girls, who was actually Hispanic, turns to him and says, "I'm pretty far from white, sir." I mean, come on. This guy is attacking people for the color of their skin and can't even get that right. And then later on in the video, and it was really difficult to make out the person he was speaking to, but he was talking to a guy, and he was very polite and respectful and attempted to engage. And of course, when Brian Sims realized that was going to happen, he said, "You know what? I don't care what you have to say." Just like most leftist cowards. Now here's another clip of this guy where he is harassing an old lady. Like I said, coward.
So I have a couple questions for you, ma'am. How many children have you clothed today? I'm sorry, I missed your answer. How many children have you clothed today? How about how many children have you put shoes on their feet today? Have you fed any children today, or have you just stood out in front of a Planned Parenthood shaming people for something that they have a constitutional right to do? Huh? If you're here about the children, you can pray at home for children. It's probably the same place that you could feed a child, but you're not. Instead, you're out here shaming people for something that they have a constitutional right to do. Who would have thought that an old white lady would be out in front of a Planned Parenthood telling people what's right for their bodies? And if you're a white person like I am, we have a lot of catching up to do. We have a lot to apologize for, and I'm going to apologize. I'm going to start by apologizing for this woman. Shame on you. What you're doing here is disgusting. It's an attack on common sense. It's an attack on the Constitution. It's an attack on the rights of every single person coming here. And don't convince yourself that what you're doing isn't extremely racist. How dare you? This is grotesque.
I mean, there was so much to unpack there, but he is projecting big time. This rant right here proves him to be a misogynist, racist, anti-Christian, bigot. Pretty much everything that he is claiming, he's projecting his inadequacies. He's projecting the things that he knows about himself onto this old white lady whose only crime was being white, Christian, and believing that abortion is wrong, which clearly offended his delicate sensibilities. I really do want to unpack a lot of that and get into a few other things, but unfortunately, we are out of time. Wow, that went quick. But thank you all for listening, folks. I really appreciate it. We're seeing the numbers creep up a little bit. I'd like to see it explode. So please, when you listen to this, please share it, invite your friends. You can find us on iTunes, Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, pretty much any platform that you get your podcasts, you'll be able to find us. I'm also on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at The Liberty Cast on all three platforms. So please feel free, engage, and I look forward to hearing from you. But until next time, as usual, keep your head on a swivel and stay safe, everybody.